den rechten
La cantante de más de 200 ans a perdu 2% de la
Teil an der Nordseite sowie des Außenbereiches
moving forward.
What happens to mobilities in crises? The media have termed the 21st century the century of disasters, population growth and migration to cities, an increase in extreme weather events, and the interconnectedness of the modern world all accelerate global systems failures, such as pandemics, terrorism, and financial crises. And the Financial Times actually has declared disaster management among the top 10 challenges for science. Bringing a mobilities analytical orientation to crisis is very productive. Indeed, crises and the effects they make visible show just how complexly mobile the social, political and economic systems that we have today are. And the potential for chaotic effects becomes visible, how they cascade through those systems. Even minor crises can have far-reaching consequences. Mobilities research can map, track, analyze, and reveal those flows and connections. In a way, you could call crisis a perspicuous setting for studying mobilities because they make the mobilities, but also blocked movements and immobilities, and the way things are immobilized visible. The gigantic triple disaster in Japan is in a different league in terms of the losses it incurred and also in terms of the ripple effects it caused. It very quickly caused turbulences in the global car manufacturing industry, for example, based on the just-in-time logistics that's based on. Reports of shortages emerged within days, and at the end of March, just 17 days after the earthquake, a Morgan Stanley report explains the issue of potential supply shortages in the car industry is a top global priority. And the effects of on the car industry and the overall total economic cost of the Japanese disaster of roughly $235 billion as estimated by the World Bank, is of course only a very small part of the overall total devastating loss caused by that disaster. But apart from dissecting and critiquing the vulnerabilities and inequalities of today's radically and multiply mobile systems, a mobilities analytical sensitivity and perspective and the mobile methods we have can help shape mobility systems to become better, more efficient, more sustainable, more human. And this is of course a huge challenge for science, for social science in particular, to make critique constructive, to become engaged in debates about what better might mean. But at least for myself, mobilities research creates valuable opportunities for engaged research like that, with both integrity and impact. In the Bridge project, I work with a group of about 50 computer scientists and emergency response professionals to co-design better communication technologies, communication infrastructures, and communication practices for multi-agency emergency response in major disasters. But the massively distributed collaboration that's required under these circumstances raises immense challenges. And time again, post-disaster reflections on these response efforts across the globe highlight communication, coordination and collaboration as problematic. For example, in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, the US Department of the Interior offered assets that were immediately available for humanitarian and emergency assistance, including 300 trucks, 300 boats, airplanes and staff. But although they repeatedly attempted to provide these resources, there were no mechanisms to actually efficiently integrate and deploy them. And a month earlier, during the 2005 London bombings, it turned out that the radios used to coordinate the emergency response didn't work underground, where many of those explosions had taken place. So they had to employ human runners to relay information between the agencies. And post-disaster reflections also showed that the emergency agencies interpreted data protection regulations overly rigidly, refusing to share names and contact details collected from victims, which meant that some people fell through the net, and it obstructed the provision of a continuity of care, causing much distress. In the Bridge Project, my colleagues and I carry out studies with emergency responders, trying to understand how communication, coordination and collaboration can be supported. And that's not a matter of throwing more technology or better technology at these really very real problems. It's a matter of supporting and augmenting the real-world practices these people employ to communicate and collaborate. And this is a big job, and I can only give you a glimpse of the kind of things that we're developing. The main backbone is an infrastructure for emergent interoperability and agile emergency response. Every emergency is different. People need to combine well-designed and well-rehearsed emergency plans with improvising and pulling together things that might be useful in this instance. And in recent years, one of the most vibrant areas of improvisation is public engagement in crisis response. So in relation to the 2007 California wildfires, for example, people affected found that the information that was provided by the official agencies and the media was too slow, out of date and not accurate. So they started generating their own situation reports with their mobile phones, mapping how the fires spread, and research pioneered by a group around Leisure Palin at University of Colorado Boulder shows that information provided by a massively distributed and mobile public has the potential to significantly enhance the situation awareness of professional responders. So there's real potential to dovetail the efforts of such mobile publics with the efforts of the professional responders in ways that could enable more agile emergency response. But there are also challenges, and let me give you an example. On the 22nd of July last year, I was driving home from here, and on the BBC News there were reports about a bomb in Oslo. Many of my colleagues work in Oslo, so I stopped the car and called Jan Harvard, one of my colleagues, and said, "Are you all right?" And when he said, "Yeah, we're all right, it's a mess here and we don't understand what's happening," I said, "Okay, great. Can you collect all the social media communications that are happening around this crisis?" And he did, and we analysed around 220,000 tweets. And one particularly interesting thing that we noticed was that there were a significant number of tweets asking for resources or offering resources. People distributed hospital phone numbers, they called for blood donations, they requested that people open their Wi-Fi networks because the mobile phone networks were overloaded. And then, if you remember, the attacker moved to the island of Utøya, some 35 kilometers further northeast to Oslo, and there he shot 69 young people gathered there for a youth meeting of the Labour Party. And shortly after the Utøya shooting began, in our data stream, we noticed Niels Petter receiving the following tweet from one of the people on the island. he says, "We are sitting by the lake. A man dressed in police uniform is shooting. Help us regarding when the police will arrive." And that was sent at 5:58 p.m. on July the 22nd from an iPhone. And at the point this tweet was sent, the police had already arrived on the opposite shore, which is only 1,500 meters away from the pier on the island. But they didn't actually get to the island until half an hour later, because there was difficulty in understanding the situation and the danger. There could have been another bomb or other issues. So on Twitter, Niels Petter gets more updates from the island, and if you read the figure from the bottom up, you see details about injuries and what the situation was like. Imagine yourself reading this and having a friend on the island. Maybe you wouldn't, but many people did this. They called them. And Niels Petter's response then reveals that it was absolutely crucial to stop people from doing that. With some urgency, he tweets, "Do not call acquaintances on Utoya," explaining that it can put them in danger because the sound of a mobile ringing would have alerted the shooter to them. So in effect, Niels Petter is a volunteer emergency operator, channeling and mediating between those on the island and the concerned public and friends and relatives. At the same time, some of the people nearby the island heard shots and cries for help and used their boats to pick up people from Utoya and the surrounding waters. And we don't actually know whether tweets prompted people to do that or not, but in parallel to this happening, there were numerous tweets and retweets encouraging residents and tourists near the island to use their private boats to rescue people. So there were things like, boats on Utoya are recommended to pick up people from the water, the temperature is low, high risk of drownings, rescue boat is on the way, or do you have a boat close to Utoya? Pick up swimming children around Utoya. And much of this was happening while the official emergency responders were still trying to figure out how to organize themselves and get to the island. And you can find more discussion of this kind of online and offline public engagement in crisis response and the possibilities and dilemmas it creates for agile emergency response in a paper we wrote on peripheral response. But I'd like to end returning to a remark I made earlier about emergency response agencies interpreting data protection regulation in an overly rigid manner. Because there's a really serious challenge, momentous in my view, arising around the processing of personal data in relation to crises. From all these mobile phones that people have, their position would be available if you wanted it. Even if the phone's turned off, it's possible to determine its location. The kind of system for emergent interoperability that we are designing in the Bridge project make data sharing practically easier for the parties involved in an emergency response. And of course, when it's about life and death, you want that. You want people to know where you are and to find you fast and to give you a personalized service based on your medical history, for example. But can you also expect the gates opened between those agencies to shut again after the emergency is over? When is the crisis over? Who decides? What does this do to the separation of powers that's critical to democratic societies? And what kind of mobilities are we creating here?
Seite sowie den Außenbereich in Rechten.